Today, we're diving into the story of a pretty ordinary man whose life tells this absolutely extraordinary tale of resilience, risk, and that relentless search for something better. So let's get into the incredible journey of John Walmsley.
And this is really the central question of his whole story. As we follow his path from 19th century England all the way to the other side of the world, just keep this question in your mind. What drives someone to go through unimaginable hardship, all for the hope of just starting over?
All right, so our story kicks off in the heart of industrial England. John Walmsley was born way back in 1839, and his world was one completely defined by the smoke and steam of the factories that were, reshaping the entire country.
John grew up in a world of these really stark contrasts. On one hand, you have the memory of the green English countryside, but on the other, the dominant reality of the Industrial Revolution, that constant, deafening noise of the cotton mills, where he worked as a steam sawyer, cutting timber for an industry that just could not get enough. By 1871, John had built a life. This census snapshot, it really shows us a full house. He's a steam sawyer, his wife Grace is a weaver, and they have 5 young children. Wow! They even take in a boarder, another weaver, probably just to make ends meet. This was their entire world, built around the relentless rhythm of the mills. But this life, as established as it seemed, well, it wasn't enough. The Walmsleys were like millions of other Britons at the time, looking for some kind of escape, and they made a decision that would change absolutely everything. They decided to take a huge gamble.
And you really have to ask, why? Why would you leave everything you've ever known behind? Well, for the Walmsleys, it was the pull of colonial propaganda. New Zealand was desperate for more people, so they were running these assisted immigration schemes, promising land, work, a fresh start. Really, a chance to escape that grinding mill life and give their kids a future that wasn't defined by lint-filled air and the roar of machinery. So, in August 1874, the whole family boards a ship called the Hydaspes, and it's bound for Auckland. But this journey, the one that was supposed to be their ticket to a dream, well, it turned into something else entirely.
That 2 to 3 month voyage, it just quickly descended into an ordeal that would test the absolute limits of their endurance. It was a true nightmare. This timeline really shows you just how long their suffering went on. Barely a month into the journey, scarlet fever breaks out. For weeks, the disease just raged through the cramped quarters of the ship. And when they finally see the shores of Auckland, there's no relief. They're immediately put into quarantine. It would be December, nearly 4 months after they left England, before they were even allowed to set foot on solid ground.
And the cost of this outbreak was just devastating. 12 people trapped on that ship lost their lives. That's 12 journeys, 12 dreams cut tragically short. And here's the most heartbreaking part of all. Half of those who died were children. 6 kids. Can you just imagine the terror John and Grace must have felt, trying to keep their own 5 children safe while watching that kind of loss happen all around them? So after surviving the disease and the voyage itself, they face one last trial, a month-long quarantine, watching from the harbor as the few things they owned in the world, anything that might carry infection, were literally burned or thrown into the sea. They were going to land in their new country with pretty much nothing.
But they did land. And despite everything they'd been through, they set about building that new life. And here, John makes this really surprising pivot. The steam sawyer from Lancashire completely reinvents himself.
And for a little while, it seemed to work. He becomes a confectioner, and by 1883, he's actually successful enough to be a landlord. Then, a year later, he expands the business, running both wholesale and retail. It really looked like the great gamble had finally paid off.
But just as quickly as it was all built up, it came crashing down. The sweet life they were building turned very, very sour.
The collapse was this awful mix of family and finance. His daughter marries his business partner, but within just a couple of years, that partner goes bankrupt and flees the country, leaving the business in total ruins. Now, this wasn't just bad luck. It was part of a wider economic depression hitting the colonies in the 1880s. But by April of 1886, their New Zealand dream was officially over. The shops were empty.
So, with nothing left for them in Auckland, the Walmsleys had to move again. They packed up what little they had and crossed the sea to Australia. This next chapter, though, would be marked by a really profound personal loss.
In 1890, after 30 years of marriage,
30 years of crossing the world, building and rebuilding, John's wife, Grace Ann, died. The simple words from her funeral notice, deeply regretted, they just speak volumes about the loss of the woman who had been with him through everything.
Now a widower in a new country, John had to start over one last time. And what he achieved in his final years is maybe the most remarkable part of his entire story.
In Ballarat, Australia, John Walmsley, now in his 60s, rebuilt yet again. He became a successful grocer, and he earned a new identity, an enterprising merchant. After all the failure and all the loss, he finally found not just success, but real respect. This final act of reinvention turned out to be his most enduring.
And honestly, nothing illustrates the life he finally built better than this. When he died at age 73, his pallbearers included doctors, surgeons, businessmen, and constables. This wasn't just some former mill worker from Lancashire anymore. This was a respected member of Ballarat society. He had at last arrived.
Which brings us right back to our first question. John Walmsley's journey was one of immense hardship, sure, but also incredible resilience. His story isn't one of fame or fortune, but of just pure endurance. It leaves us all wondering, what is the true measure of a life? Is it the destinations we manage to reach, or is it the journeys we somehow manage to survive?